According to some former Cuban intelligence officials, the number of plots against Fidel Castro may have exceeded 600. If even a fraction of that number is true, it would make Castro one of the most hunted political leaders in modern history. The people trying to eliminate him were not amateurs. They included CIA officers, covert operatives, exiles, informants, scientists, and organized crime figures with connections stretching from Miami to Havana. Over the years, plans ranged from professional assassination attempts to ideas that sounded completely absurd. Poisoned cigars, an exploding seashell placed near a favorite diving spot, a diving suit contaminated with dangerous bacteria, poison capsules passed to people close to Castro, even a former lover carrying a hidden dose of poison. Millions of dollars were spent. Countless hours were devoted to planning. Entire operations were launched, canceled, redesigned, and launched again. Yet the result never seemed to change. Fidel Castro remained alive. He ruled Cuba for nearly half a century. He outlasted multiple CIA directors, survived the administrations of 9 American presidents, and watched many of the people hunting him disappear from power. In the end, Castro was not killed by a sniper, a bomb, a poison pill, or a secret operation. He died peacefully in his bed at 90 years old. So how did one man repeatedly escape the reach of the most powerful intelligence machine on Earth? Cuba is only 90 miles from Florida, less than 200 kilometers. For Washington, it was like watching an enemy move into the house next door. When Fidel Castro took power in 1959, the problem was not ideology at first, it was money. A lot of money. American corporations owned sugar mills, oil refineries, utilities, hotels, and vast stretches of land across Cuba. The Havana casinos alone generated fortunes for investors and organized crime groups with deep connections in the United States. Then Castro started taking everything: factories, plantations, hotels, casinos. Entire industries were nationalized. Billions of dollars in American assets disappeared almost overnight. For many people in Washington, this was more than a political defeat. It was a humiliation. A tiny Caribbean island had openly defied the most powerful nation on earth and remained unpunished. Then the situation became even worse. Castro began building close ties with the Soviet Union. Suddenly, the United States was no longer facing a hostile government somewhere across an ocean. It was facing one almost within sight of its own coastline. Inside the CIA, removing Castro stopped being one option among many. It became a mission, and the agency was given extraordinary freedom to make it happen. The hunt was about to begin. At first, the CIA was not trying to kill Fidel Castro. It was trying to destroy his image. American intelligence believed Castro's greatest weapon was not his army or his police force. It was his popularity. Millions of Cubans saw him as a revolutionary hero, a man in military uniform capable of speaking for hours, with a thick beard that served as the ultimate symbol of his cult. So the CIA came up with a strange idea. Instead of removing Castro from power, they would make him look ridiculous. One plan involved contaminating his boots with thallium salts. This toxin destroys hair follicles. The CIA expected Castro's legendary beard to literally fall out in front of the entire country. The operation never happened. Castro unexpectedly changed his schedule and never came near the location where agents were waiting to gain access to his personal belongings. Then came an even stranger proposal. During a live radio broadcast, operatives considered releasing a chemical agent similar to LSD inside the studio. The goal was not murder. The goal was humiliation. If Castro suddenly began speaking incoherently on national radio, millions of listeners would hear it. That plan also collapsed before it could be executed. The games were over. Inside Washington, pressure for a permanent solution was growing. The CIA was about to turn to allies nobody expected. In 1960, the CIA crossed a line and formed a secret alliance with one of the last groups anyone expected to see working alongside American intelligence: the Mafia. For years, federal agencies had been trying to dismantle organized crime. Now the same criminal networks were being approached as potential partners in an assassination plot. The Mafia had powerful reasons to cooperate. Before Castro's revolution, Havana had been one of the gambling capitals of the Caribbean. Casinos, luxury hotels, nightclubs, and prostitution networks generated enormous profits for crime syndicates connected to the United States. Then Castro shut everything down. Among the figures later linked to these discussions were Sam Giancana and Santo Traficante Jr., two influential mob bosses whose interests on the island had been devastated by the revolution. Both sides wanted the same outcome. The CIA wanted Castro removed. The Mafia wanted Cuba back. Castro had to disappear quietly, without a single shot and without leaving CIA fingerprints on his corpse. CIA laboratories produced capsules containing pure botulinum toxin, one of the deadliest substances known at the time. The capsules were transferred through a covert network operating in Havana. Their destination was an upscale restaurant where Castro regularly ordered a chocolate milkshake. Death was now just one sip away. The milkshake plot was destroyed by an ordinary kitchen freezer. A Mafia-connected insider had hidden the botulinum toxin capsule among frozen supplies inside a Havana restaurant frequented by Fidel Castro. When Castro finally arrived and ordered his usual chocolate milkshake, the operative moved to retrieve the poison. The capsule would not budge. It had frozen solid against the freezer shelf. As he tried to pull it loose, the thin casing cracked in his fingers. The toxin spilled across the ice and became useless. One of the most carefully prepared assassination plots of the Cold War ended inside a freezer. Washington immediately searched for another vulnerability. This time, the target was Castro's obsession with cigars. CIA specialists prepared a box of cohibas treated with an extremely powerful toxin. The dose was so potent that simply placing one in the mouth could be fatal. The lethal box of cohibas arrived in Havana, but the tobacco never reached Castro himself. By then, his security apparatus had become increasingly suspicious. Tobacco shipments, food deliveries, gifts, and personal items were subjected to growing levels of inspection. The poisoned cigars disappeared somewhere inside that security system. The CIA was forced to look for its target in a place nobody expected: at the bottom of the sea. Castro was obsessed with diving. Few world leaders spent as much time underwater as he did, exploring coral reefs and collecting unusual shells along the Cuban coast. Inside the CIA, somebody eventually saw an opportunity. The proposal sounded absurd, even by Cold War standards. Agency planners discussed placing explosives inside a large seashell and painting it with bright colors. The logic was simple: make it so unusual that Castro would notice it immediately, pick it up, and trigger the explosion himself. The idea never left the planning stage. There was no reliable way to guarantee that Castro would find the shell first. A fisherman, a tourist, or another diver could easily reach it before him. The ocean, however, remained attractive to CIA planners. Another operation revolved around a gift. American lawyer James Donovan had established a working relationship with Castro during sensitive negotiations between Cuba and the United States. The connection attracted attention inside the agency. A premium diving suit was prepared for the Cuban leader. The danger was hidden inside the fabric. According to later accounts, the material was contaminated with dangerous fungi and bacteria capable of causing serious illness. Donovan knew nothing about it. Looking at the item, he decided it appeared too plain and unimpressive for a head of state. Instead, he bought another diving suit himself and presented that one to Castro. The contaminated suit never reached its target. Castro survived again, completely unaware of the threat. But the next plan would not involve the sea, a cigar, or a poison gift. It would involve a woman. That woman was 19-year-old Marita Lorenz. A few years earlier, she had become involved in a passionate affair with Fidel Castro and quickly found herself among the people closest to the Cuban leader. Unlike hired agents or informants, she had something far more valuable: access. After leaving Cuba, Lorenz became connected to anti-Castro circles linked to exile organizations and covert operations targeting the regime. Eventually, she received a simple assignment: return to Havana, get close to Castro again, kill him. The weapon was small enough to fit inside a cosmetic container. Several poison capsules were hidden inside a jar of cold cream that Lorenz carried with her during the trip. When she finally arrived in Havana and prepared to act, the plan began falling apart. The capsules reacted with the chemical composition of the cream. Within days, they had turned into a useless sludge. Administering the poison without being noticed was no longer possible, yet the mission itself was still alive. Lorenz eventually found herself alone with Castro. According to her later recollections, he looked at her, understood exactly why she had come, and calmly handed her a pistol. Go ahead. For a few seconds, the woman sent to kill Fidel Castro stood holding a loaded weapon and could not pull the trigger. The secret to Castro's survival rested on two things: absolute logistical chaos and one of the most aggressive counterintelligence systems in the Western Hemisphere. By the mid-1960s, assassination plans were no longer the problem. Getting those plans anywhere near Castro was. Inside Cuba, security services were building a vast defensive network. One of the key figures behind it was Ramiro Valdez, a revolutionary veteran who helped create the country's state security apparatus. Informants disappeared. Couriers were identified. Recruitment attempts suddenly collapsed. Operations that looked promising often fell apart before reaching the execution stage. Castro made the problem even worse. He had no permanent residence and moved between numerous villas, safe houses, and private compounds across the country. Ministers, military officers, and even members of his own administration often learned details of his movements at the last possible moment. Routes changed without warning. Convoys changed. Schedules changed, sometimes only minutes before departure. Former intelligence officers later claimed that Cuban services successfully penetrated exile organizations and anti-Castro networks operating abroad. Many plots were reportedly discovered long before they could be launched. The CIA was hunting one man. Behind that man stood an entire security machine already waiting for the next move. After the failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion, the rules changed. Washington was no longer searching for a single opportunity to eliminate Castro. An entire machine was built around that objective. The program became known as Operation Mongoose. Thousands of pages of plans were produced. Intelligence officers, military specialists, technicians, informants, and exile groups were drawn into a campaign that seemed to expand with every passing year. The operation generated a constant stream of new assassination concepts. One of them involved a prominent Cuban economist who had access to Castro. CIA operatives supplied him with a specially modified pen containing a hidden microneedle loaded with the lethal toxin Blackleaf 40. The injection would be almost impossible to detect. At the last moment, the recruited agent lost his nerve and destroyed the evidence. The plan died before it could begin. Another opportunity appeared during Castro's visit to New York for a United Nations session. Intelligence planners explored multiple options, including placing explosives near his speaking platform and contaminating equipment he would use during public appearances. They never got close. Cuban security isolated Castro from technical personnel and tightly controlled every movement around him. The window closed. The target remained alive. Years passed. Money flowed. New ideas arrived. New failures followed. What had started as a covert operation was becoming something much larger. An obsession. The turning point came after the Watergate scandal. In 1975, the U.S. Senate launched the Church Committee investigation and began exposing operations that had remained hidden for years. Poisons, toxic cigars, and the CIA's secret partnerships with organized crime suddenly became public knowledge. The findings were deeply embarrassing for Washington. A year later, President Gerald Ford signed Executive Order 11,905, formally prohibiting American intelligence agencies from participating in political assassinations. For the first time, the U.S. government officially stepped away from the hunt for Fidel Castro. But the story did not end there. Anti-Castro militants and exile groups continued pursuing the same goal for decades. One of the most serious plots emerged in Panama in 2000. Authorities uncovered a plan linked to Luis Posada Carriles. Nearly 90 kilograms of explosives had allegedly been prepared near a location where Castro was scheduled to speak. The operation was disrupted before it could be carried out. Once again, Castro survived. By then, he had already spent more than 40 years living under the shadow of assassination attempts. When he finally left power, he had outlived 11 American presidents. The Soviet Union had disappeared. The Cold War that helped define his rise belonged to history. In 2016, Fidel Castro died at the age of 90. Not because the hunt finally succeeded, because time accomplished what intelligence agencies, criminal networks, covert operations, and decades of planning never could. This was never just a story about luck. Again and again, Castro was protected by security services, counterintelligence, operational mistakes, human fear, and sheer coincidence. In the end, the longest hunt of the Cold War ended with the hunters empty-handed.